Before I start the meeting, I'm required to give you the normal advisory in that I remind councillors the public section of this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and that the recording will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting. I also remind all present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Here endeth the lesson. So we've got apologies. I have an apology from Chairman Leader, who is unavoidably detained elsewhere, and for Councillor White for lateness. He will be joining us at 10:15. But I can confirm that we do have a quorum. There is no public forum. There are no items on the agenda to be added, or no items to be added to the agenda, and there are no changes to the order of business. Can I just ask, are there any conflicts of interest which need to be recorded?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Just to note a couple of matters, one of which I might talk to. In Leon's management report, there's a matter with one of the port subsidiaries, Prime Port, which is the Timaru port, and it's an accounting issue. I may raise a minor matter over that. I'd just like to record the fact that I'm chair of Timaru District Council's Audit Committee, which is the other half of the owner. It's just to understand the situation in relationship to us as the group reporter. I don't believe that's a conflict. The other thing is in PX is a matter which involves Tauranga City Council, and I would just like to reflect that of course I'm on the Strategic Risk and Audit Committee, but I have no question in relationship to the matter that's in hand there.
Councillor Crosby.
In a similar vein, there are notes that in regard to Quayside in the audit report, so just note that conflict.
As usual. Yeah. Anybody else? No, thank you. Right, do I need to receive those?
The apologies?
Yeah, no.
No.
I'll receive the apology. I move that we receive the apologies. Seconded.
Abby.
Thank you, Andrew. All those in favour, raise your hand. Thank you. Right. There are no public excluded business to be transferred into the open. We are going to deal very quickly with NZ Audit, but we're just going to deal with the minutes of the last meeting first, which should get through very quickly. So, are there any amendments or matters arising from the minutes of the 2nd of December meeting?
Happy to move true and correct.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Robertson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Right. We are now down to the Audit New Zealand report on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council for the year ending 30th June 2021. So before we start, I just need to point out that there will be a second recommendation which will come up on the screen as we get to it, which will be explained as we go through. Well, Kamaran, welcome to the meeting. Off you go.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. So this report is essentially a normal part of the audit process where audit issues a final management report following the final audit for last financial year's audit. Essentially, the report sets out the findings on council's financial and non-financial performance. Key recommendations on key findings in terms of opportunities for improvement, along with prompts for management responses, which is outlined in the report. In addition to that, it also covers past or prior year recommendations and a status update on management's action in response to those recommendations from prior years. The cover report tabulates those prior year management report items and the status of that, which is currently 18 in quantum, 14 of which are reported as closed and 4 currently still open. With the permission of the Chair, I would...
Okay, I will welcome to the meeting online, zooming in, Leon Patesi and Anton Labouchan. You're very welcome and nice to see you. I'm glad we could accommodate you nice and early to enable you to get on with your other business. And I just want to reflect at this time, it has been a very difficult year due to COVID for all of us in many ways. And I think what we need to do is just recognise that we have had a difficult year and that we move on and with fingers and toes crossed, hope that the next year runs more smoothly. And that is not to criticise anybody in this respect, it is just to recognise the fact that it has been difficult. So Leon, do you want to make any opening comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked Anton to talk to our management report, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thank you. Anton, you're very welcome.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. I'll keep this brief. I gave quite an extensive overview on the key matters at the adoption meeting, but the key points I want to highlight from our management report is really in the key messages page, which is page 3 of our report, where the main matters was the council performed a revaluation of those rivers and drainage assets, land and building assets, marine and road asset classes, and recognised a revaluation. We were quite happy with the work performed there. I just want to note that the rivers and drainage assets was a revaluation as of 1 July 2020, and then the council performed the fair value assessment as at 30 June 2021, and there was no significant movement, and so we agreed that there was no revaluation required as at 30 June 2021. I do note there is a typo where we see 30 June 2020, we'll get that corrected to say 30 June 21. The other area of revaluation that does require a bit of estimates is the put option. We had a look at that and we're quite happy with the process and the liabilities. You may recall for June 2020, we used the auditor's expert to look at that. For 2021, we did not re-engage the expert, but we confirmed that the formulas and inputs remain unchanged, other than updates for current year information. So we're happy with that movement, and we do note that the movement came down by 400,000, going from 3.4 to 3 million. I think the other thing we do want to note, there was some prior period errors that flowed through from, one was from KPM, the audit that KPMG performs over the Port of Tauranga, where in regards to revaluation policies where they're not consistent within the group to the Port of Tauranga, and they required a movement, and we also identified one error within the council's annual report on their prior year figures. We've had a look at all the updates and we're quite happy that it's been correctly reflected in the financial statements. And then as Cameron had noted, there were quite a number of prior period issues we've raised that have been cleared. You'll note on our page 4, we know that there were 18 issues, of which 14 have been addressed. So that's quite a big, I think 78% addressed by management, so that's a very good effort. And as Councillor Love noted, it was a difficult year, and we just want to again thank the staff and management of the council for the effort provided and assistance to get the audit completed. I suppose Leon and I are free for any questions at this point.
Right, I think what I'll do is open it up for questions straight away. So, Mr. Robertson, you're champing at the bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I can't wait to get into the audit. No, let's get Ross. Thank you, and I appreciate that you've presented, and I actually want to compliment you for the report. I know the timing is not the one that you would desire. I would love it earlier, but I'm very grateful that we have a report that is about not only the region but also the group. And I think as we discussed last year with you and with Leon, it was really important that we recognise that we are reporting, we have group reporting responsibilities as well as obviously the entity, Bay of Plenty region itself. So that's great. Look, I've got three questions. David, I do have one around audit arrangements, which is a different matter to the management report. I'd be keen to talk to that after I've dealt with my questions over the management report. Look, it's just to clear out two or three minor matters, Anton or Leon, and relax as to who speaks to it. I wonder if I could just turn us to page 6, please, or actually, sorry, that might be your reference. I better just check what the agenda is. It's dealing with the unadjusted errors. And this is where I get the slightly tangential interest of mine with, I think, Port of Timaru, or Prime Port. The second one, consistent group accounting policies, which I think has arisen because Port of Tauranga had to pay for a revaluation of, what do we call them, EAIs, and their assets, which essentially I think includes Prime Port. What's the chance that this will be an issue in this coming year? In other words, that the matter is reflected again and could be material. So really I'm asking a question about the non-aligned accounting policies. What's the chance this comes back to bite us this year if those policies remain unaligned?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I may. First of all, there was a right period error in that flowed through from the Port of Tauranga account that related to land, and that has never been revalued, and land and wharves, I think. And that has been revalued and led to that error that came through. The 7.5 million relates specifically to buildings which have not yet been revalued. So the Port of Tauranga is pushing hard to get those revalued in line with their policies. But of course, you've got only so much control over associates. And then this error was calculated by Port of Tauranga, at which stage KPMG looked at it, and we interrogated it as well during our group audit at Quayside, but also for the Bay of Plenty Regional Council audit, to ensure that 7.5 million is a reasonable estimate. But please note the word estimate.
And I think my question, Leon, I understand that. I think my question is, what's the risk that it affects us in the coming year's audit?
Well, that is why it was included in the letter of representation, because there is a risk. I can't put a percentage on that risk. Only time will tell once a reevaluation of the buildings happens.
David, that's why I'd like to come back to the audit arrangements after we've dealt with the management
Okay.
report, because I'm not certain this is the best situation. I would love us to know. I understand what undisclosed risks are, undisclosed errors are, which is things that we haven't adjusted for and below an assessment of what would affect the reader, called materiality. But I just want to make certain that we nail this as an issue early for the group accounts. And look, the second thing, Anton and Leon, is the recommendation you have around the RITS control in this SOC Type 2 report. I was just wondering if you could amplify for me quite what you're getting at, because it seemed to me that we do a piece of work which you have relied on and found acceptable, which is the Power BI control, which gives a sense that actually we do some external work, admittedly reliant on the RITS information, to confirm our revenue. And now you're suggesting that actually, while you've relied on that control, you want a different control. Can you just clarify the situation for me, please? Because I understand there is quite an expense or cost to what you're recommending.
Absolutely. So, first off, we changed our mind. So when we wrote this report, the easiest way of auditing these kind of factory numbers is to get the Type 2 report confirming the controls on the other side. However, after the audit last year, we have done extra work to get sufficient assurance. So this is all about audit assurance. And so we had to do additional work to be able to get across the line without a Type 2 report. We then had a discussion with management. We also engaged with the OAG as well as our technical team, just to see, because when we spoke to Matt, the indication was that this will be expensive, and the other councils are not going to pay for it, or are not comfortable paying for it, which we understand, because they don't see this as a significant measure. Because of the view of Bay of Plenty Regional Council of trying to get people out of cars into public transport, we consider this to be a significant matter. Anyway, the long story short is we are, what we're working through at the moment is the standard approach for your council, as well as one or two others that it may be significant for. And instead of asking you to spend money to get a report purely because the auditors need it, we'll rather do additional procedures and get a standard approach to auditing this so that we get sufficient assurance over it.
Thank you. So that suggests then that the nature of the recommendation has changed slightly in the way that you've said. So, look, I'm happy if we can get an update on that as things go on, particularly as you indicate this is probably a control that helps you more than us, given my discussions with staff suggest our Power BI approach gives us some overall assurance. That's cool. Hey, look, one other minor matter. Sorry, I'm conscious that I've taken a bit of time here, David. On page 47, and it might be more a question to you, Matt. We've still got an open necessary recommendation around the fraud policy. If I've got that right, I'm going to be able to clear that one up soon.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chairman, we have a piece of work going on in the internal audit team on updating our current fraud policy and practice. So maybe
great.
I'll ask Aaron to talk about that when he gives an update on the internal audit work programme.
But it's not, I don't, for the record, for my colleagues here, I don't sense we have a great risk here, Matt and Aaron and Stephen. It's just one of those things that actually I've seen from around the sector. The Auditor General is obviously keen, and I'm just keen that we tidy it up and we get a little bit of assurance from time to time that we don't need to be too worried about it. Thank you. Thanks for that, David. I'm sorry if I've been taking too long or been a bit pointy-headed.
No, I'm
It's been
quite
helpful.
content that we employ you as our external advisor to externally advise us, and we're grateful for that. Did you want to raise the other matter now, which you were...
Oh, well, perhaps my colleagues have got questions, Dave,
Okay.
about the management report itself.
Right, any questions from the rest of the team?
No, your issue with regard to the RITS reporting was one that I was going to raise, and I think we've got a simple ground, so go with that.
Are there any other questions about the report itself?
I was going to raise the fraud policy as well, so thank you for that. But just an observation more than anything else is that just how complex these are, because we're operating in two groups really. If you look at the port, they have the port and a range of subsidiaries. Then you look at Quayside, we have three major companies and a range of other subsidiaries, so that's one group. And then you look at Quayside and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. It's quite complex, so I just want to note that, and I think the audit through all those processes is very important, obviously, but we can get distracted sometimes on issues that we cannot control because of the multi-group structure. And I think Bruce has raised that issue, Timaru, for example, evaluation. That's very distant to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, but we are connected to it.
No, excuse me, I do agree with you on that. It's the auditors do face a significant task in auditing this quite complex group, and I would think, other than Auckland, we must be one of the more complex in their portfolio. Right, no other questions, Bruce?
Thank you, David, and I'll sought your leave to, and I think Miranda's got it on the resolution to just raise a small matter. Look, I understand and know nearly firsthand, not quite firsthand because I'm not on the audit side, the challenges for Leon and Anton with audits, and indeed both the public and the private service providers within the public sector for audits. And it would be normal by now, in short, for us to have the audit arrangements and to be able to, as a governance body, have some assurance that we've got processes in place to deal with the issues. Things like you're talking about, Stuart, are in hand, and we haven't got that at this stage. And I'm not grumpy or anything like that, but I'm just reflecting. We don't have the audit arrangements. We don't know when we're going to be necessarily signed off as a group, although Matt's given me some idea of the discussion that's been going on between management and Leon. So recognising the context, what I'd like to recommend to the committee and by way of a resolution is that you and I, on behalf of our governing members, have the opportunity to sign off in between meetings, or approve, I should say, on behalf of elected members, the audit arrangements. I'd like to see them actually finalised pretty soon, so I haven't put a date in there as to when it should be finalised by, but it's going to clearly need to be in front of our next meeting. So I think it's important for elected members around here that somebody is keeping the governance oversight, that we have adequate audit arrangements in place for the region and the group, and hence the relevance of, I think, the resolution in red that I and David delegated the ability to be able to clear those, and I would suggest let you folk know by email that we've done that.
Okay. Leon, I'm presuming you can see our screen and the second recommendation. Do you have any comment to make on that?
Just two comments, Mr. Chair, thank you. The one is, we call it an audit plan these days. I don't know, that's not really significant. But
Throw my
just to
age,
show you the
Leon.
fact. Well, and then the other one is we aim to get the audit plan to you by June. And what Bruce said is quite true. It is much later, than what we would have wanted, and especially Anton and I are really focused on timeliness. This is extremely frustrating. The good news is that with the borders opening, we may get some staff from overseas. The bad news about the borders opening, we may lose some staff who are waiting to go on their OE, but we'll work very closely with you.
Leon, can I just report a wee bit of frustration if it's June? Sorry, that's a bit late. In my personal view, even in light of some of the relatively minor, but still important matters that I've raised and Stuart's recognising in terms of the group, I think there are two things that are really critical with the audit plan. One is that we can have a proper and open discussion about the risks and issues, the measurement and recognition issues that will affect the annual report, and that we should have a shared approach in terms of dealing with. The other is clearly the sort of the logistics. When are we going to get signed off? And actually, and my presumption is, and I think from talking with Matt, it will be post the election. Therefore, some of the arrangements we have to have in place to enable the new council, once constituted, to sign off. I really would think mid-May would be, quite frankly, that's why I didn't put a date in here, but I'll be up front. I would have thought having the audit plan by mid-May was not unreasonable on our part to request.
So, you can understand, hopefully, the seriousness in which we view this. Of course, it's complicated by the fact that we do have the election coming up in October, and we are going to unusually ask the incoming council to approve the audit when they have had no chance to input anything to that, especially for the newer members. So we really do want to crack on with this and ask, I'm not going to ask you to put a date on it now, but do want you to proceed with all the rapidity you can to get that audit plan to us. So, do you want to make any comment before I move the recommendations?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So Anton and I will have a relook and see if we can bring June forward to May. Well, we're probably going to comment about the other issue you raised later. So let's stick to that one for the moment.
Okay.
Thanks, Leon. Appreciate that.
Andrew.
with you two being part of this, I'm very happy to move this, both recommendations. Thank you.
Seconded by Councillor Clark. Anybody, any further speakers on the matter? Thank you. Therefore, I put the recommendations which are on
Yes,
the
yeah.
screen. Councillor Donaldson has moved. It's been seconded. All those in favour? Sorry. Ah. I thought you were a big man, actually. But anyway. Right. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Right. Leon and Anton, thank you very much for your time. I know you're really pressed for time, so we'll now let you press on with making sure you can get the info, the action plan to us for May. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Right, we are now on to 8.2, Chairpersons Report, which I always think is in fact Matt Taylor's report, so Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I will present your report. So the standard Chairperson's report, which includes the forward-looking and backward-looking programme for this committee. But one thing I would like to highlight is following on from the discussion we had with the auditor, to highlight the annual report draft that this committee will receive in September, the last meeting of the triennium. And the intention would be to, taking into account the discussion we had with the audit plan and the audit arrangements we will have with the auditor, to get something like a draft letter of representation to your meeting in September, so that you're able to pass on as much as you can information to the new council, and confidence and assurance over the process that's gone on in December is intended to be able to review, to then give assurance to the new council in November, because that's our current timeline. But having said that, we are still yet to see the audit plan from Leon, so that's considering that we have an audit plan that does deliver to that timetable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would just like to make a comment. You know, it is a difficult time for all of us. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, you know, we've just got to recognise we live in difficult times, and just hope that it's not made even more complicated by the fact of having an election later in the year, and hopefully we can get through the majority of the work, so until we can hand over to new council a good position to be in at that time. Are there any questions on my? Sorry.
Dave, but just make one comment. Look,
Yeah.
I probably expressed my frustration to Leon. I still hold that frustration that we can't get a plan out. Can I just reflect what I shared with you last night? The Auditor General, as I understand it, has only essentially allowed two councils to be signed off prior to the elections. They're Auckland and Christchurch, because they are issuers. In other words, they issue debt to the market, and they had certain market matters they had to comply with. I know actually that there are one or two others that are sneaking through before the elections, but in terms of the audit arrangements across the sector, very few councils are being signed off pre the elections. So Leon is not picking on us, and I also happen to know that he's batting on a pretty sticky wicket. But that goes back to my final point. I still don't see why we shouldn't have an audit audit plan relatively soon. That's straightforward, because there are some issues there that we just need to make certain Matt and Kamaran and the team are able to address in a timely fashion. I'd like to know those issues were done and dusted by 30 June. That's what I've shared with Matt, poor old Matt. So that's what I'd be keen to see that we do in this process.
Do you or Matt want to amplify what those decisions are for the remainder of the committee?
Sorry, what sense, Dave?
Sorry.
What decisions? No. All I was reflecting is there is a lot of there is, if we go back to the fact that we've now, and Stuart, you raised it well, we've got a group to account for. We always have, but clearly there are some substantial issues that have filtered through in the course of the last audit. I don't see why they are still not there. In other words, they are matters that we need to traverse to the satisfaction of our auditors, I think we should be able to know what those issues are, to understand that we have under control how to address those issues, and it's not just about Matt and the team, but it's actually the auditors are ready and in principle could sign off on those issues now, rather than the hot period of a week or two prior to when the opinion's actually due. I'm looking for what I call front-loading the issues. It's the cheapest time of the audit to actually get things solved.
Does anybody else want to make a comment on these matters?
I think, Mr. Chairman, just to add, the uncertainty for Leon seems to be around capacity and resources within the team, rather than the process we would undertake. So in the audit plan, there may still be some uncertainty of whether or not the auditor will have resources to do the plan, but we can agree the process that we will undertake. And with the resource gaps, understood that would be provisional, a provisional time frame for that. So that's what we're asking for. We understand there'll be uncertainty and COVID or other factors may affect the delivery of the plan. But if we can agree the methodology, the process steps, the outstanding issues, as Mr. Robertson's already pointed out, that are there and visible for everybody, if we can agree that through the audit plan, then we can prepare our work and work with the auditors to help them front load those issues, rather than sit in November and December, as we did last year, with some new items that come onto the table that we have a problem as a team dealing with. So it's about front loading those, as Mr. Robertson says. So even though I understand Leon will have some concerns because of his capacities as auditors, there should be no issues with the process that we undertake.
Yeah, I just want to reassure the committee that these are complex matters, but we do have a handle on them, and we do have a way ahead. We just need the cooperation, if you like, of Audit New Zealand, and I know they are trying their best, but we do face those difficulties. Any further comments on those before I move the recommendation that we receive the report? Right, I therefore move we receive the report, seconded by Councillor Von Daniels. Otherwise in favour, please say aye. 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 Right, we're now on to the internal audit update. I always seem to start these sessions by complimenting the team on where you've got to, and yet again, I'm complimenting you that we are achieving what you're employed to do. So, can I start by saying, well done. So, over to you for the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to hear. The last quarter has been impacted by COVID issue. No, to ensure we continue to progress the program, we've pivoted to doing as many audits at the same time as possible, rather than doing one or two and completing. Mostly this is to support the other council teams as they work through resourcing and impacts of COVID. Pleasingly, however, despite all the challenges through the period, audit actions have continued to be closed. It's quite heartening. I'll take the rest of the report as read. Were there any questions?
Councillor Crosby.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just wondering if there was any link in terms of project management and procurement, which is still part of the way I read it, part of the follow-up section. So with regard to the figure 1 on page 61, where you're at with procurement, has that actually been signed off? I know there was a major review done a few years ago. So I'm just seeing if there's a link between that and the project management internal audit that's underway. Could there be a link?
So yeah, through you, Chair. So certainly there was a review done of procurement a couple of years ago, and most of the audit actions have been closed in terms of that review. The project management review looks at project management generally, and so we'll touch on some of the main projects that are happening in the organisation, how those are run. And one of those projects has been the way procurement is being done within the council. So we'll touch on that as well, and a number of other projects in terms of how we manage projects generally.
So when it says procurement still open, what does that mean? Has it not been finished, or is it always open? that's on the graph on page 61.
Through you, Chair, that refers to actions from the previous audit, which is still in progress. The audit itself is finished, it's just the actions being worked.
Mr. Robertson?
Thank you, Aaron. And look, it may be more just it's almost a semi-risk question. I was just interested, piqued by the ICT security review, where I think you're hinting that the digital team's been affected by the COVID situation, and it just sort of made me want to seek a bit of clarification. I take it that means they've been affected, that staff members are down with COVID, they aren't in a position to be able to have an internal audit. But of course, I also made me think a wee bit more, what is our security situation like if they're down with COVID? Have we got suitable backup? In other words, are we from an IT perspective being able to maintain our secureness status through the course of the current COVID environment?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I understand what you're asking. Basically backed off to give them the room, to be blunt. That team has been very busy. Like everyone, they're impacted by COVID. They've also been asked to support all the staff working from home at short notice. Yeah. So the audit itself has been deprioritised to accommodate that. In terms of are there security findings being worked on? Yes, in the background, absolutely. And they're still progressing things as we identified. But it's really tidying up the report to get it issued.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I would like to note as well that during the course of the year, in the midst of everything else which has been going on, the team has rolled out Authenticator, which has really given us another level of security on our IT. So it's not business as usual, it's enhanced business which we're going. So I keep a constant and a close eye on the IT and IT security, and I'm satisfied in my own mind that we are in the best possible position, or we're in the position that we ought to be. There is no such thing as 100% guarantee, but we are in the position we ought to be in regard to IT security and the protection for our systems and data.
Thank you.
Can I ask one probably incredibly naive question? Looking on page, which one was it? How do on earth do you audit gravel extraction? The others I can see process things, but gravel is something that comes whooshing out of hills and stuff like that, but I'm not quite sure, do you piece count it or what?
Through you, Chair. I didn't go out and count the gravel, I did go out and look at the sites, but it's essentially around processes we have to make sure we're complying with the things we have to comply with, we're charging people fairly for cost recovery and items like that, and also supporting the community in the right way. It's not around going out and counting gravel, but it's making sure that the current approach fits within the flood management requirements for the region.
No, thank you very much.
Can I just say in this regard that Chairman Leader has made comments to me during the course of the year that there may well be issues with the accounting and auditing, or not the auditing, but the accounting for gravel extraction. I'm presuming you're aware of those comments which you made, and how far are we on the path to resolving them?
A couple of things were identified in the review, however those actions are being worked on by the team.
I could actually put some info into that space, or Chris. Yeah, it's interesting when our chairman's leaders alluding to the stockpiling mechanism that he's had some problems with reconciling. In my capacity as chairman of the rivers and drainage in that part of the world, the stockpiling system has actually turned out to be a real blessing in the context that currently it's severely depleted because Aponiki District Council had an emergency. They were able to access that stockpile and to cater for that emergency because they couldn't afford to stay, and they will replace it. So it's actually filled a wider role than what we actually initially anticipated, and I think there is a lot of validity in the concept. But I think that's probably the point you were looking for.
No, really what I'm saying is that yes, I can accept that, but there were certainly some loopholes which became apparent in the not just in the stockpiling, but in the way it was being accounted for and in the operation itself. Chris, do you want to comment?
Yes, certainly support Councillor Clark's comments there. We only recently had a meeting in the Audit area for their river scheme, and certainly the commentary around there is that we've turned a corner massively in terms of the way we manage gravel in that particular river scheme area for those two rivers. So that's working a lot better now in terms of relationships, well, across the board really. But I think what you're talking about is the actual measurement of the gravel being extracted by contractors, and that is a work in progress, because the methods that are available to the engineers are not perfect. They're estimates more than perfect measures. But there is new technology being developed using drones that can much more easily and cost effectively do more accurate estimates of what was there and what's been taken, and therefore the calculations will follow. So we're looking forward to that being trialled and implemented over the next year or two.
Thank you. Matt, do you want to comment on that at all?
No, I think this was a conclusion of the internal audit, and this report here is just showing the actions that are either open or closed for that particular audit. So as Chris said, there will be some ongoing practice changes within the team and lessons learned from the audit.
Further questions to internal audit? No? Right. Therefore, would somebody like to move the recommendation on page 59, which received the report? Right. Moved, seconded by Councillor Vardalos. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Carried. Right. How are we doing on time? Right. Draft terms of reference for efficiency and effectiveness reviews. This matter arose from the last meeting when Councillor Von Daddelson rightly expressed some concerns and suggested a way ahead, and there's been a substantial piece of work which has now been done to try and address those changes. I think what I would think we ought to comment on is the fact that we are now putting this in place, but the place it can be most effective is in the formulation of the long-term plan. With those comments, Kamaran, would you like to comment, or is it Matt?
Straight over to Kamaran, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. So in response to committee's request at its last meeting to explore the opportunity of researching the terms of reference for efficiency and effectiveness initiatives, staff have looked at that and done some research in consultation with various sources around New Zealand, Australia, central government, guidance from the Auditor General. And the two key themes have come up through that research. One is around finding a balance between the rigour of an efficiency and effectiveness approach and being able to achieve the desired outcome with a level of speed and pragmatism and agility. So just finding that balance is one theme. The other theme is that any efficiency and effectiveness initiative is not a one-off process, it's part of continuous improvement. The assessment is also highlighted, there are several processes within Council that currently can be leveraged off to explore these initiatives. There's planning processes like the long-term plan, as the Chair's mentioned, annual plan, which are prospective looking processes that provide that platform to explore such initiatives. There's also retrospective reporting processes such as the annual report, reporting that occurs during the course of a financial year, such as the Arataki performance reports, and the detailed financial briefings that are held with Council to provide that platform to identify and provide direction on any effectiveness, efficiency and effectiveness initiatives that Council wants to explore. The other element is around the continuous improvement being focused at both the governance and the management level, and these processes essentially provide those platforms to be exercised at both levels to explore that. So when looking at that, looking at those themes, the attached draft terms of reference is essentially based on trying to find that balance between rigour and agility to achieve desired outcomes without while avoiding duplication of effort. It's also based on some core principles as outlined in the report, and essentially is forming a platform for discussion for this committee to advise staff if that forms an appropriate basis for the new committee structure, whatever that form that might take following the trying in, to include that as part of its work programme.
Open for questions, Councillor Untitled.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is something that's entailed within the Local Government Act, that we are required to always seek efficiency and effectiveness as part of the Act, and it's really important. I am one that really does like to look at trends, and so I urge staff in future reports and for especially for long-term planning, not only to give us what the present and the future looks like, but give us a really good trend analysis so that we can see over the last 5 years where this council's heading in terms of trending. And that brings me to benchmarking, which is an incredibly valuable tool. We've tried to do that within the local government sector, somewhat unsuccessfully to date, in my view, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think we need to be strong advocates at a local government level to ensure that we actually do start benchmarking successfully between our peers, and if there's any outside industry, them too, because it's only through that, through benchmarking, especially when you integrate in a private sector benchmark as well as the public sector benchmark, that we might find rooms for improvement, and that's all we're looking for. We're looking as governors, we don't want to have to drill into the detail ourselves, but we want to see reports that actually give us an indication and comfort as to where we're going. And in the past, I haven't been happy that we've done that successfully enough, and I want to ensure, and as we go through this long-term plan work, it becomes even more important, especially in these times like now with COVID and the huge cost escalations that we're facing, and the effect that will have on our ratepayers. I happen to be from Tauranga City, which has a very high average age still. We used to be called $10 Tauranga, and that was mainly because they were all retired people, and we've got a lot of younger families in Tauranga now, but still the predominance is the plus 65s who are in the majority on fixed incomes. And when we look at what the Tauranga City's doing on rate rises, and we look at ourselves, we have to, we want the best for our city and our ratepayers, and that's not to say we have to be penny pinching, but we just, this to me is a really critical piece of work that this committee can and should undertake. So thank you for putting it as a, building a terms of reference to actually recognise the importance of it. I think that's really important. But I urge you to actually think more deeply about the benchmarking side of it, and make sure all your reports to us in financial matters has a bit of trend analysis, so that we don't have to go away and find the figures, which are always a problem to do, to find them out of old reports. That should be business as usual for us. So thank you for, I compliment you on putting this as a work program.
Thank you for those comments. I think you'll recognise that this is exactly the path I've been treading all the way along in my role as Chairman of Risk and Assurance, in that I've been working with the staff to make sure we do get a report which enables us to fill our role as governance. And we are moving very quickly towards that. I'm very pleased with the progress which we're making in that regard. So these are all matters which we really need to take on board. I'm pleased that we are doing it. I'm pleased we're doing it for next council. One of the things we ought to, efficiency and effectiveness review needs to look at, and I've been making the comment, we need to look at what we may no longer need to do, or what may no longer be relevant based on changes of conditions since the councils in the past made a decision. We've not been very good at that at all as the governance team, and that's something which this report will help us to concentrate on. So any further comments? Yes, Councillor Crosby.
Thank you for the report. In terms of the draft terms of reference, when I first read it, I really struggled to see how you're going to go about it. Then when I reread it the second time, it's in the approach. So there's a lot of background information in it. But I would have liked to have seen more of the how and the what. And one of the greatest opportunities to be more effective and efficient is in scale. And I do note in the approach in matter 6, you talk about collaboration, and we do collaborate to a degree. But, you know, I've gone through many Section 17A reviews, and to be frank, they've been defending the realm rather than really opening up and having a really good look at the opportunities. See, local government's an interesting beast. It's, in a way, the complete opposite to the private sector in this space. We do a budget, and staff members are compelled to spend it all. Otherwise, there is a problem. And if you, and in the private sector, it's in a way the complete opposite. You know, you do a project and you do it as effectively and efficiently as you can, and do not attempt to spend it all. And I know that can sound a bit strange at times, but that's the culture in local government, and I think we need to bring in some private sector principles and processes as well, if we can, into the public sector. So that's the only question I would have, and if there's one amendment, it is really to flush out more of the how and the what, and really to bolster up what I see as probably the greatest opportunity is in that collaboration space.
If I may say, I think this is what we mustn't regard this as a one-stop. Excuse me. What we have to do is continuously improve all our efforts in control and audit and risk. And I'm sure the team will view this as a stepping stone rather than the final destination of where we want to get to. Kamaran, do you want to comment?
Sorry, I forgot to add one thing. You know, the biggest responsibility actually is with the elected members, in my view. You know, we ask for all this stuff to be done, or we sign it off. And through the LTP, as you rightly say, or even an annual plan, you know, we have to do more due diligence and rigour around the organisation of what we expect of it, because in many ways we create this issue. And I think as many councillors said, particularly Councillor Andrew, is that, you know, we need to spend more time, and often we're rushed right at the end of either an LTP or an annual plan, and we don't give ourselves enough discussion time or thinking time to give, you know, clear direction to the staff, and a lot of it winds back actually to effectiveness and efficiency.
Can I do through the chair?
Kamaran, Bill, and then you come in at the end. Right. Kamaran.
In response to the Chair's request, the initiatives that will no doubt present itself to Council over future planning processes and reporting processes will provide an evolutionary process for Council to continuously improve and increase its standards of performance. But in light of the comments circulated around this chamber, is also the fact that governance would need to look at the evolutionary improvements in terms of the framework for which effectiveness and efficiency is explored, so that clear guidance is given and direction for the organisation to respond to. So on both fronts, in terms of the execution and the framework that governs the execution, there will be a continuous evolutionary process in terms of achieving the desired outcomes over time.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's always been a point with me and the governance operations side, how prescriptive governance is entitled to be in the context of allocation. And I suppose one of the things that always continues to amaze me is that when we put up major projects out there, that we have contingencies of 30% written into them. Now, that I think potentially suggests poor planning, the ability to have an extraordinary amount of wriggle room in your contract, or as Stuart's just suggested, the ability that, hey, we've got all this in the pot, let's spend it. And I guess my question and query is, as a governance body, do we actually put prescription in around what we would see as being an allowable percentage, say, in terms of our contracts? You know, I mean, is there any comment in that space?
Mr. Chairman, that's a straightforward one to answer. We've reported to this committee and to the council the process for agreeing contingencies. Obviously, prior to an engineering project, for instance, being set, before the detailed design work, before the consenting, the contingency is necessarily bigger, and that narrows down as we get through the process to finally approve the budget. Councillor Clark quite rightly points out that sometimes the contingency does seem to be a large element of the budget at the start, but that is because there's so much unknown and so much risk associated with that particular capital project. But we've reported and had the engineering team come and report the process for that contingency and narrowing it down to a reasonable amount based on the type of project that is being undertaken. But as I said, we can quite happily do that as we report on individual capital projects and talk about the methodology through the annual plan and long-term plan process we have, that the contingency is there because of the uncertainty. And as you narrow down and deliver the project, you'll get clearer and clearer around how much of that contingency you will need.
Further comment? Now, I'll therefore move to recommendations and ask you to note that there is a second recommendation, which we're not just receiving the report, but we're suggesting that it be put into effect. So, can I have a mover for the recommendations 1 and 2 to take together? Right, Councillor Dowson, seconded. Robertson, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right. So that's the end of the public part of the risk and assurance agenda. We're now going to break for 15 minutes. So we'll be back here at 11:15. And we were going into public excluded when we come back.
Recording stop.